And it will come to pass afterward that I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men see visions. And also on my men servants and on my maid servants I will pour out my Spirit in those days. From this verse, it's clear that in the last days the Spirit of God would be poured out. And as the historical record accounts, during this time we see the resultant miracles from this apostolic ministry, this Pentecostal ministry. So we have the charismatic that arrive onto the scene in the 1st century. And at the parousia, at the return of Christ in 70 AD, I believe that this specific time of miracles prophesied to happen in those days ceased. Not to say that all miraculous action has stopped, but as the scriptures say, love never fails, but whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there are, you know, whether I hate that sound, man. I hate it. Right. Love never fails, but whether there are prophecies, love never fails, but whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when that which is perfect has come, then that which is in part will be done away. And 70 weeks were determined for your people and for your holy city to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. And so it appears that the charismatic movement of the Spirit fulfilled its purpose. What I seek to address in this video is the question of whether or not the Spirit itself departed from the world, having fulfilled its purpose. Now, you may think that's an absurd proposition, but it's something that has to be taken seriously, given light of these scriptures, in whom, having believed, you were sealed with the Holy Spirit of promise, who is the guarantee of our inheritance until the redemption of the purchased possession. Until the redemption. Set his seal of ownership on us and put his Spirit in our hearts as a deposit, like a down payment or earnest, guaranteeing what is to come. From this, people have formulated an understanding that when Christ returns, there is no need for a comforter to tell you anything, as that which is perfect has come. The Holy Spirit was the earnest of the 1st century believers' inheritance until the redemption of the purchased possession, until they are purchased, the return of Christ. So some believe the Holy Spirit, like the gift of tongues, was to vanish away in the 1st century. An interesting side note here. Matthew 28:20 reads, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So understand this. Christ says that he's going away and sending another. And yet in Matthew 28:20, he's saying, I will be with you always, even till the end of the age. I thought he was going away and sending another. So how do you explain that? And you really need to explain that if you seriously want to make sense of and understand the narrative of the New Testament. And if you do, there's a link in the description box below to the TrinityDelusion's video on Jesus Christ the Comforter, because in fact, the Christ is the Spirit. As it says in the scriptures, the Lord is the Spirit. So back to the issue at hand. So Ephesians 1 and 2 Corinthians 1 give us reason to believe that the Holy Spirit was a seal of promise until a time, the return of Christ. So are we preterists supposed to believe that the Spirit was to cease along with tongues and prophecy and visions and all else? Well, in Revelation 22:6 we read, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give of the fountain of the water of life freely to him who thirsts. Here at the consummation of all things, people are invited to drink water. The question is, what is that water? Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst, but the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. Revelation 22:17 reads, "And let him who thirsts come, whoever desires, let him take the water of life freely." And this is an invitation extended to us by the Spirit and the bride. In John 4, we're told of living water, and in Revelation 22, water of life that springs up into everlasting life. What is the water? He breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit." The water of life is not bottle fed into the sons of men, but the petrichor of those living waters having rained down as a pleasant aroma to those conforming themselves to the image of Christ. For I will pour water on him who is thirsty, and floods on the dry ground. I will pour my Spirit on your descendants, and my blessing on your offering. See, we are not heavenly people by virtue of the fact we are born or exist in the new covenant. While all things are reconciled to God, there is a resurrection to condemnation. This is why there is an outer darkness at the consummation of all things. There's an outside the gates. Blessed are those who do his commandments, and they that have the right to the tree of life, and may enter through the gates into the city. But outside are dogs and sorcerers and sexually immoral and murderers and idolaters and people who love and practice a lie. So we can see that water is used as a metaphor for spirit. The living water is the Spirit. In the new covenant, we have to consciously approach the water, which is to accept the divine nature of the Spirit. Now, another point to make here, Matthew 12:32. Anyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man, it will be forgiven him. But whoever speaks against the Holy Spirit, it will not be forgiven him, either in this age or the age to come. So how could you wrongly assign the works of the devil to the Holy Spirit or speak against the Holy Spirit in the age to come, unless the Holy Spirit was active in the age to come? So if there's no Holy Spirit in the age to come, then there's no way that you can wrongly identify it as evil. Now, I suppose you could understand it as Christ making a prospective judgment on those he's addressing, that those who hear him and do this, if they survive until the age to come, then they're not to expect forgiveness even then for that sin. But I think a far more sensible understanding is that he's saying speaking against the Holy Spirit in the age to come will not be forgiven. And from this, I reason that there must be Holy Spirit in the present age to speak against in the context of Matthew 12 and Mark 3, which is to call the action of the Spirit unholy. See, that's the context, that's the important point. So in conclusion, I would say that the apostolic ministry, the charismata that defined the first century, and that ended that first century Christianity with all the miracles and everything, that ended in 70 AD, at which point all things were reconciled to God, and the waters of life, that is, the Spirit of God, was made accessible to all. Those who love Christ are blessed with access to the tree of life, and those who are ungodly are outside the gates. Again, we are not heavenly people by virtue of the fact we exist in the new covenant age. We must love God to drink of the water of life, which is to be included in that one Spirit. According to Revelation 22, at the fulfillment of all things, the alternative is to sit outside the city where there is gnashing of teeth. It's important to remember that there is one Spirit, and God is Spirit, and we're called to be a part of that. John 17:3, 2 Peter 1:4. And so there's a logical argument there that, in order to be a part of God, you must partake of the divine nature. You must possess the Spirit of God. So in that sense, as we understand it, there is still Holy Spirit. God is Spirit. So on an ontological level, you can't really escape that. And that's echoed in the scriptures in the Psalms 139 and in the book of Romans. It's spoken about how can you escape God's Spirit. Even if I descend into Hades, God is there. The Spirit is there. But that's not to say there isn't a distinction between that which is transcendental and that which is material. That's another topic. You could look into panentheism if you'd like. But I think the point to be taken away from here is that God is Spirit, and we are called to partake of that Spirit. So this is a thought-provoking subject. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section below. If you've seen my previous videos, I do engage with you, so I'll be happy to take any questions. You might want to go back and ask something about Jesus Christ being the Paracletos or the Comforter, or you might wonder then what's the tangible interaction with the Holy Spirit like then. You might want me to explain the metaphysics of how that happens, and I will be happy to ignore your question when that comes up. I didn't write the Bible, folks. I didn't write the Bible. In the New Covenant, there are living waters, and we are invited to drink of that water. Jesus Christ in John 4 makes clear that he gives water that wells up to a spring of everlasting life. That is synonymous with the Spirit.